The Compliance Perspectives podcast is sponsored by Athenian, a leading provider of entity management and governance software. Get started at www.athenian.com. Welcome to the Compliance Perspectives podcast. I'm Adam Turtletaub from the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics and Healthcare Compliance Association. Joining us today is Washington, D.C.-based Hemma Lomax. Hemma is Vice President, Deputy General Counsel, and Global Head of Ethics and Compliance for DocuSign, and she'll be speaking at the 2025 Compliance and Ethics Institute on Beyond the Rules, the Future of Compliance is Legacy-Driven Leadership. Hemma, thanks for taking time to talk to us today and for speaking at the conference. First, what is legacy-driven leadership exactly?
Yes, and thank you for having me, Adam. I'm so happy to be here with you to chat about this topic. It's one of my favorites. Look, as an ethics and compliance professional, I often say we're on a mission to help people operationalize their best intentions. And that to me is what legacy is really about. It's about what legacy do you leave, not just managing for quarterly returns, but leading with the long view in mind, asking not just what did I deliver, but maybe what did I leave behind and what ripple effect did I have. So I think this is really important when it comes to our role as ethics and compliance professionals, because not only do we want to do that for our corporate executives, but we have an opportunity to do that for ourselves and ask what legacy are we going to leave behind in these corporations that we serve.
That's a very laudable approach that I don't think gets talked about very much. So how do we reorient executives to think that way?
Yes, well, it's a good question. I have this vision of tapping an executive on the shoulder, a CEO, or maybe even a president, and saying, "Your legacy is not out of reach," and making them realize that it actually is possible to hold best intentions and operationalize them. To go back to that phrase, and this is important because so often we get bogged down in, like I said, the quarterly reports or the task at hand, and we don't step back to think about how we have positional power and leverage, insights and talent that we can use to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the long run. So I think, we have to start by showing that legacy is not an abstract concept. It's actually a strategic asset. And we talk about that a lot, the return on integrity, the return on ethics. This is a way of communicating that to these individuals. And also, there's something at stake there, right? It's not just about regulators anymore or bottom lines or shares. It's actually about ease and peace of mind as you sleep at night, knowing that you go to your end of days with satisfaction that you did everything you could to leverage your talents and your power for the good.
The idea of being able to sleep at night is a very good one because it really does speak to having accomplished what you want to do and not having regrets. So how do we reorient our own thinking to focus on legacy-driven leadership?
Yes, well, first I think we have to recognize that every human has what I like to call a survivor brain and a sage brain. And many of us are guided by the survivor brain. In fact, compliance officers, lawyers, we're trained to look for risk, to look for the worst case scenario and advise on that. And so I say we must be careful as ethics and compliance officers that we don't amplify the survivor brains of those we serve. And what I mean by that is, you know, an executive, a CEO may already be worried about taking a new stand or going a different route from his peers. And yes, we want to give decision useful information about choices that an executive can make, but we don't want to only amplify the survivor brain. So that's actually how we tend to get this reputation as the office of no. And I like to say, we consider it as the brakes on a car, but really think about the brakes as what you can use to accelerate, to make strategic, swift, safe decisions to keep moving forward, as opposed to, just throwing out the worst case scenario and saying, good luck with that. It's a business decision in the end. So I think we need to reorient our thinking, tap into our sage brain as well as our survivor brain. It's there for a reason. It's not going to be it's not going to go anywhere. But certainly, if we can realize that we can do hard things well together and lean into the sage powers of empathy, curiosity, ambition, these things can really help us reorient our own way of thinking and therefore amplify that thinking in others.
Another problem with the survivor brain is it tends to make everything about a life and death decision, and that frankly is exhausting, but it also gives people sort of a sky is falling approach is what they start to think of you, and you certainly don't want to do that. Oh, and parenthetically, I'm on a personal mission to change the analogy about compliance from brakes to traction control. that it's our job to ensure that when the business unit hits the gas, that we move forward in the direction they want and don't spin out of control, like all those videos you see of somebody with a new hypercar who proceeds to stomp on the gas, lose control, and crash right away. Our job is to prevent that from happening. Now, can you share with us an example or two of companies that have turned ethical challenges into competitive advantage?
Yes, yes, and it's really good to lean in on this and show examples where this works. So I like to think always of Patagonia as one that comes to mind immediately. Patagonia faced this ethical dilemma of being part of an overconsumption economy. You know, we know about mass production of clothing. We know about the overconsumption of that and the impact it can have on the environment, and even the supply chain issues that you have with that sort of thing. Well, Patagonia dealt with that head on and said, instead of hiding it, they went ahead and owned it. And maybe about a decade ago, they had a campaign in the New York Times, I believe, saying, "Don't buy this jacket." This campaign was legendary. And instead of people not buying jackets, sales surged. And what I mean by that is they didn't just do that. They had a a way for using recycled materials. Actually, you could bring a worn jacket back in and exchange it for a new one. Many sustainable ways that they decided to lean into as part of their brand. And again, it takes some guts to do that, but the sales figures show that it really did have a positive impact on the bottom line.
That's a great example because it shows a very practical approach. What are some other practical strategies organizations should embrace?
Yes, I mean, I think, look, leaning into, you see a dilemma, and just being honest and not disingenuous about the problem, I think can be really powerful. Another example I'll give you is Salesforce. They had a gender pay gap internally, and there's many ways that you can handle those sorts of issues. What they decided to do was be very loud about it, be honest about it, and invest in fixing that. And that really impacted their brand. So the first practical strategy is to not be afraid of the challenge when it arises. What do they say? Never waste a good crisis. Really, again, enter the sage brain, not the fear brain, to see what can we do with this moment in time, and how can it actually, how can the recovery be better than the design almost. And so I think Salesforce really leaned into that. It's another example where they had a problem, but they decided to be open about it, transparent about the way that they fixed it, and they got a reputation for a great place to work. So it's a good example, especially in a moment when tech is not that popular. It's really quite something for a Salesforce to take an issue like that and turn it into a competitive advantage. So number one, 100% lead with transparency. Admit your hard truths like Salesforce did, and then you'll build trust much more swiftly, if you can ride the wave of recovery. The other, and this is the Patagonia example, but Unilever had the same thing when they had issues with their supply chain. They really embedded purpose into their processes. So they made ethics a design feature, not an afterthought. And you'll remember some of the Unilever brands like Dove doing really well, leaning into their ethical advantage. Third, I'd say create internal accountability. That means, check on your progress, do regular audits, whether it's ethical audits, pay equity audits, environmental, and most importantly, act on the results. We're very good at measuring attitudes and surveys and feedback, but the most important thing is not to cause survey fatigue by not acting on the results. So get decision useful information from your employees, from your peers, crowdsource that, and then show that you're using that. That's another trust piece. And then, one of my favorite things to say is design with the end user in mind. So ethical systems work better when they're built for the people they impact the most. That's employees, customers, and the communities in the jurisdiction of which you operate. So always keep that experience in mind. And I don't think you can go too far wrong. So I don't know, Adam, I hope those are some practical strategies that your listeners will take away. These are the sorts of things that we've seen in action be very powerful. And so I challenge your listeners to try and find opportunities where they can put it into practice.
That's really thought-provoking, and I really like it. And I think what's interesting, at least to me, is that it sort of changes the definition of legacy. People tend to think of legacy as this large construct, some institution, some process, some thing that people left behind, when in truth, a legacy can be one of calm, that you set a way for people to face issues in a calm way, using that sage brain, to use your analogy, so that when things come up, the organization handles it well, and ends up stronger for it. So, Hemma, thank you again for sharing these insights with us today. I look forward to your session at the 2025 SCCE Compliance and Ethics Institute. I have no doubt it will be very well attended. And finally, I want to thank all of you for taking the time to listen. I'm Adam Turteltaub from SCCE and HCCA. I hope we're able to expand your compliance perspective.